embarrassed. That was a lot. I also scored 6 touchdowns in a Pee Wee football game in 1987. Ian is an American hero to me. I mean, the work he does, I could go on and on about the amazing things that he has done in his charter schools and his work in speaking around the country. So, Ian, thank you very much. I'm deeply grateful. Mainly because this is the first time anyone's said my name in a sentence with hero without the modifier, he ain't no. I'm just going to say just a few words, I promise, but I owe a debt of gratitude to a lot of people. I just love America because the idea that you could grow up and see the things that I saw for so many years and end up in a room like this in Washington, D.C., as weird as it sounds, I never take that for granted, and I never will. I remember when I first got to Harvard, I called it racking up points because I would have these little things happen. I go, wow, that was so cool. Can't take that away from me. I just didn't know when it was all going to end, but I just felt like this is just great. I want to also thank Stephen for your very, very kind remarks at the beginning. Today is really special because my wife is here with me. She is a very, very fancy cancer biologist. We met in a bathroom line at Harvard at like age 20 or so. And you get busy with work and kids and so it's really special that she would get on a plane and come here for this. And I'm very grateful to her because when I was having my spat with Harvard, there was no one in the world that was more solid, and every single day I would come home and there was a period of time where I would go outside and the sky looked blue to me, but everyone seemed to be telling me it was purple. And I would walk in the house and she would look at me and smile and say, the sky really is blue. And I'm so deeply grateful for her support. We met 18 years ago, and I remember like the first week we had met, I had to give a speech in St. Louis. You probably don't remember this. We were going to St. Louis. So I invited her to St. Louis because I wanted to impress her because I knew, I was going to deliver. And I got off the stage and, I got a standing ovation. I got off the stage and I remember telling her, what do you think? And here's the reason I wanted to marry her in the first week. She said to me, literally, that was all obvious. You hungry? So thank you for being here. Thank you for your unyielding support for 18 years since the day I met you. But we couldn't be more opposite. She grew up in a very, very different environment. I grew up thinking the world, watch out, because everyone was going to hustle you. She grew up thinking, what's hustle? No one hustles anyone. Everything's wonderful. I'd also like to, we have 2 beautiful daughters. I'd like to thank them. Actually, never mind. They should thank me. I'm amazing, Dad. Do you know how hard it is to watch 6th grade field hockey? I mean, it's... I wouldn't call my daughter an athlete. She's more of an assistant coach, you know what I mean? She knows what's going on the field. My grandmother has been mentioned. We're going to throw her a party in March next year. Would have been her 100th birthday. My grandmother and I, our relationship wasn't perfect. We disagreed a lot. And besides Francisca, who's here today, I couldn't love anybody more. She taught me how to disagree with affection. It's a thing that we do in the South. In the North, you disagree and then you do whisper campaigns to kind of destroy their lives. But in the South, you'd smile and say, you full of it, man. I love you, but I don't believe anything you just said. And my grandmother she raised 4 kids by herself. And she was an amazing, amazing human being, born in 1925. And she was like a legend to me when I was a kid, because she'd been a teacher for 37 years, and so she was a local celebrity. You'd walk through the grocery store, and someone would say, "Hey, Miss Fryer, I haven't seen you in 20 years." And she'd say, "Oh, baby, I love you so much." And as soon as they left, you go, "I always thought he was going to be in jail, honey. I didn't know." That was the kind of woman she was. And I had this amazing fortune We didn't have a lot of money, and my family was really complicated. I didn't meet my mother until I was in my 20s, and my father went to prison when I was a kid. But I had the incredible fortune of sitting around and listening to old black people argue all day long and debate, and it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal. I didn't know that we grew up poor until I got to Harvard and someone told me. In fact, I thought we were kind of rich. I remember I'd gone to an elementary school because my grandmother, as Ian pointed out, had integrated this elementary school, and I went to an elementary school that was, I wouldn't even call it diverse. There weren't a lot of black kids there. I was one of the few, and it was my grandmother thought, I want you to go to this great elementary school, so I did. And the middle school I went to was mainly black, and I remember going to this mainly black middle school, having gone to that elementary school, and the kids were like, oh, you think you're better than us, you're rich, and I was very upset by that. So I went home to my grandmother, and she says, how was school, baby? I said, kids called me rich today at school. She said, don't you worry, honey. I have money. You have nothing. You are the poorest person I've ever met. Even I own the clothes that you wear, baby. I was grateful for that. I have just been incredibly, incredibly fortunate to have someone like that. And my grandmother made me a rule when I was growing up. As I said, she was a really tough woman. And there are all these stories about how tough she was with her own children. My grandmother never spanked me once. When I was really young, as young as I can remember, my grandmother made me a deal. She set me down, and I'll never forget it. She set me down. We're sitting on these plastic slip covers where the back of your legs stick to the couch, and if you sit on the corner, you might get cut. You know, that kind of thing. And my grandmother said to me, if you tell me the truth, you'll never get in trouble. I said, what? She said, that's the deal I'm making you. No matter what happens in life, if you tell me the truth, you won't get in trouble. Now remember, this is the South in the 80s. There's no timeout, right? So, I mean, the only timeout we had was like my grandmother whipping some cousin and saying, I need a timeout. Whew, I'm tired. But like, there was no other timeouts. And I did that with my grandmother, no matter how hard it got. And so it's always weird to me for someone to say, you know, telling the truth is brave. I think that's silly. It's a core value. And I just grew up thinking that you were supposed to look someone in the eye with affection and just tell them the truth as nicely as you could. And I was told, she would be very disappointed in the world we live in now, that if you did that, what could go wrong? Right? And so the honest truth is about the police paper, I didn't really think about it. I just did it. I wasn't being brave. I was being dumb. I just did it because it was the right thing to do. And in fact, in the airport this morning, my wife Francisca says, given all we know now, would you do it again? And I was like, of course I would. She was like, of course we would. We might move away and all that kind of stuff, but we do the same thing. I unapologetically love America. I feel like my story is only possible in this country. But I must admit, I'm a little worried. I've been at Harvard for 21 years now, and we have lost the art of disagreeing with affection. I thought the whole point of going to college was that you got a chance to, I remember sitting around in the dorm rooms and debating, and yes, every now and then someone's feelings got hurt or you cut a little too close to the bone, but we talked about religion, we talked about race. I remember when I showed up in graduate school, my study partner was a guy who grew up on a corn farm in Illinois. And it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I love this guy. And he would brew coffee. Oh, I love most things about him. But he would brew coffee, and he was cheap. And so he would brew the coffee, and the water goes through the coffee, but he didn't want to change out the coffee filter and put fresh coffee because that's bougie. And so he would just sprinkle some grinds on top of the old coffee and brew it. It was disgusting, but we needed it, okay? So it was 1 or 2 in the morning, and we'd go to topics like race, religion, whatever. And I remember one day we got to race. And I told him what I thought at the time. Remember, I went to graduate school at age 20. And I told him, look, I can just tell if someone is racist by looking at them. That's what I thought. And he said, huh. And he turned around and just started laughing, doubled over laughing. He said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. And he just couldn't stop laughing. And I was like, what are you talking about, dumb? Of course I can. And he says, well, am I racist? Is that guy? And then he started to show me how silly this thing was. But that's what I learned in the communities that I grew up in. And he said, Roland, you're so rigorous when it comes to the separating hyperplane theorem. How can you possibly believe that about human beings? And it was the first time that my upbringing and my science really came in conflict with each other. But the point of that story is that we lived in a time on a university's campus where we felt safe enough to have those debates. Of course my friend wasn't a bigot. I don't know, maybe. But of course he wasn't a bigot, right? And of course I should have a more rigorous way of thinking. But when I ask my students at Harvard, I teach a class called Using Markets to Solve Social Problems, and there's 200 and something students, and that's a lot of office hours, so I go early. And I tell the students, I'm here 30 minutes early. If you're here, we'll have office hours here. And so the students show up a little early. And so I get a chance to chat with them. And I asked them last semester, where do you all have these kind of discussions? I told them about my conversation with my friend. And they said, what do you mean? What type of discussions? I said, well, you figure out and debate how much gender bias is there really in the world? And whether or not America has an oppression problem or does it have a developmental problem, because the solutions are very different. And they said, are you kidding? We don't talk about those things. And I said to them, if you're the best and brightest in the world and you're not willing to debate these things so you can come up with more refined and the next generation of solutions, then how exactly are you going to help the people that you say you love so much? Yeah, that's what they said. Yeah, exactly. We've lost the art of disagreeing with affection. I'm worried about that. The second thing I'm worried about is that I'm worried that we're all starting to kind of get boiled like frogs. Even those of us who think we're radical, I think we've been pushed so far one direction that we're coming back 20% and we think we're cool. But sometimes we forget that there are basic principles that we should be living and abiding by, right? Like, I found myself the other day saying something like, given my privilege, I was like, what did I just say? Oh my gosh, right? Like, it has snuck into me. And I'm pushing constantly against the kind of things that my daughters bring home, right? My own daughters tell me, Dad, you can't say that. I say, it's my dinner table. Your mother and I paid for all the dinner. We can say what we want. I know they're embarrassed by me. My wife is laughing. She's not saying he doesn't say that. This is fun. The other day, my kids brought a friend home. She looks at our lab. We have a black lab, fine dog. And the friend says, oh, cool, you have a black lab. And I said, I can't believe you'd say that. And my oldest daughter's like, here we go. And I said, what makes you think that's a black lab? Just because he presents as a black lab, it's actually a penguin. I only do that to keep them thinking that maybe there's another way to think about things in the world. And that I do this in my teaching as well. If everyone in the class agrees, I tell them, I promise you, I will find a way to disagree. We have to stop conforming to the thing. I'm not saying do it in a knee-jerk way. This is a sensitive topic, but you don't have to go along with whatever the dominant narrative says because it's the right thing to do or because it's comfortable, right? You just don't. I don't need friends, really. I got like 3 of them. I'm good. And the last thing I will say is that I am worried about not just the censorship from peers on campuses, but the self-censorship that goes on. The modal email I get from a student is to have a secret lunch where they can tell me about their radical idea. I know it's a secret lunch because it's at 2 o'clock. I'm like, I'm hungry by then. But they'll say, hey, can you meet me at this cafe at 2 o'clock? I have something. And they'll come to me and literally say, Professor, I have this idea. This happened about a year ago. I'm saying this because it's become a relatively well-known case. Someone comes to me and says, I have a result and I don't know what to do with it. Okay, tell me about it. Well, I used the leniency of judges, which is a well-known statistical strategy in economics. So you have cases are given to judges in a relatively random fashion. If you happen to get one that's more lenient, you get less time. If you happen to get one that's more strict, you get more time. And the student had used that natural variation to look at the incapacitation effect on, in other words, if you have a father in prison longer, what does that do to the family? Okay? And what he found out was that for some people, having your parents in prison longer actually helped the kids. He says, what do I do with that? I said, shout it from the rooftops. The same thing you'd do if you found the opposite. What do you mean, what do you do with it? Or students tell me all the time, I don't think I can say this in public. I'm like, who do you think you are, Jeff Sessions? I mean, like, what do you... This is not the Situation Room. You don't have the codes. Some 25-year-old graduate said, I'm not sure I can. No one's listening to you. You can say whatever you want in public. But I do worry about that because if you think about it, if you look at at least in economics, the academic journals, since 2016, I can't think of a paper that's been published that's been center or right conclusions. Is that a coincidence? Did the data get a little more liberal? I don't know I'm worried about that because in the neighborhood that I grew up in, we are depending on folks like you in this room and those students to come up with ideas like Vertex Academies and others to be helpful, right? Not exclusively, but we need real ideas. We need new ideas. And if people are worried that they can't say this in public or they're worried that a particular perspective or policy won't be adopted because of who it offends, then it's discombobulating to me to think about how on the one hand we can say Black Lives Matter and everything is great and all children can learn, but I don't want to incur any personal costs helping them out. There are literally millions of kids in situations like I grew up. And the saddest part for me about going home is that it hasn't changed. Last time I went to Daytona Beach, Florida, I saw a 12-year-old kind of ambling around on a bicycle in the ways that I used to, hanging around the block and just kind of, I don't know, just riding around. And our eyes locked. And it almost brought tears to my eyes because I thought to myself, I used to look like that kid. A lot had happened to him. for him to look at me in the ways that he looked at me. A lot. And that's the way I used to look at people. And that problem, that challenge, is not going away by itself. We need policies, we need brilliant minds, we need sophisticated analysis, we need the next generation of students to feel safe or to have the values to tell the truth. I'm very grateful for this honor, I have to tell you. And it's not just words, as you know, I don't just say things. 8 years ago or so, when we were having our spat with Harvard, and I talked to my wife, and I'd say, I'm not sure there's any more awards in my future. And she's like, oh, it'll all be fine. I was like, nah, I don't think so. I think I'm done. So it is very, very, not just ironic, but I'm very grateful to be here. And so I'll accept the award for intellectual freedom, but not as an individual. I want to do it like a curator of a precious heirloom that is holding it for all the real heroes, like Ian and other people that I deeply respect, who are doing the real work, no matter the cost, to be helpful to those that are more disadvantaged than they. Thank you.